Dolores D. Hampton never imagined her life would be defined by motherhood. Not because she didn't want it, but because life had already shown her the deepest kind of loss. 2 pregnancies, 2 tiny hopes, 2 funerals before the dreams ever grew, and each one carved something out of her, something she wasn't sure she would ever get back. But grief does 2 things to people. It either hardens you or softens you in places you didn't know existed. Dee softened. And one warm afternoon in 1992, she found herself sitting in a worn-out government office, staring at a pale, trembling 4-year-old boy who had no shoes on and no one coming for him. He didn't cry. He didn't reach for anybody. He looked at the floor the way children do when they've already learned the world doesn't want them. That boy was Travis. And right then, something in Dee whispered, "Take him home." But what happens when the child you save grows into the man who tries to break you? Stay with me. Dee brought him back to the little house she shared with her husband Samuel, a hard-working, broad-shouldered black man with a quiet smile and the kind of steadiness children cling to. Samuel didn't hesitate. He opened the door, knelt and looked Travis in the eyes. "Son," he said softly, "you're safe here." It was the first time anyone had ever called Travis that. And that night, while the boy slept, curled up like someone expecting the world to snatch him away, Dee stood in the doorway and whispered to Samuel, "I don't know if I can do this." Samuel wrapped his arm around her, kissed her forehead, and said the words she carried for the rest of her life. "Love is a choice, and you've already made it." Travis was difficult at first, not rebellious, just afraid. Children who have been abandoned don't disobey. They simply don't trust yet. He flinched if Samuel raised his voice, even gently. He stiffened any time Dee tried to hug him. But the Hamptons were patient with a purpose. Dee made warm breakfasts every morning, even when he wouldn't eat them. Samuel taught him how to tie his shoes even when the boy insisted on doing it wrong. They read him bedtime stories, prayed with him, took him to church, and introduced him to neighbours. Little bricks that slowly built a foundation under a child who had never had one. And slowly, painfully slowly, Travis began to change. One morning he reached for Dee's hand on his own. A month later, he ran into Samuel's arms when he came home from work. And the day he called them Mom and Dad, Samuel went quiet for so long that Dee thought something was wrong. He wasn't hurt. He was crying. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. For years, the Hamptons lived like a family that had been woven together on purpose, not by accident. Dee cooked. Samuel laughed. Travis grew. His skin was pale in a house painted with warm brown tones, but he fit in all the same. Because family is not created by skin, it's created by choice. But even in the happiest homes, life has a way of shifting when you least expect it. Then came the day everything changed. Samuel's heart attack. It was sudden, cruel. The kind of loss that knocks the breath out of a whole neighborhood. Travis was 16. Old enough to understand death, too young to understand what it does to a mother who has already buried 2 children and now stands alone. Dee cracked that year, not visibly, not loudly, but in the silent ways women do when they have to keep moving. She worked double shifts. She slept in pieces. She aged a little too fast. But she never dropped Travis. She pushed him through high school, pushed him away from trouble, pushed him toward the life she believed he deserved. She didn't let grief swallow her. She let it sharpen her. By the way, if you're watching this and stories like this hit you deep, make sure you subscribe. We tell real, powerful black stories the world doesn't want to talk about. Now, let's keep going. For the next decade, Dee stayed steady. She kept the house going. She kept the bills paid. She kept the same patience, the same strength, the same unconditional love. But here's the part she didn't see. The part that was growing in shadows. As Travis grew older, becoming a man with broad shoulders and a deeper voice, the memory of where he came from began to fade. He forgot the shoes he didn't have, forgot the nights he cried himself to sleep in that government facility, forgot the warmth that saved him. He started thinking in terms of ownership, not gratitude. In terms of entitlement, not love. Dee didn't realize the shift immediately. Mothers rarely do. We see the child we raised, even when the man standing in front of us is becoming someone else. But the truth was there, subtle, growing, poisonous. It showed up when he told her she worried too much. It showed up when he called the house his future home. It showed up when he rolled his eyes at the woman who once soothed his nightmares. These were cracks, thin at first, almost invisible. But grief had already cracked Dee once, and she didn't have another break in her left, because what she didn't know was that the child she rescued would one day become the man who threw her away. For most of Travis's childhood, Dee didn't ask for much: respect, responsibility, a thank you here and there, not because she needed praise, but because gratitude keeps a home balanced. But something changed when he reached adulthood. Not overnight, but slowly, quietly, the way mold creeps into a wall you thought was solid. It started with side comments, small ones, the kind you dismiss at first because you don't want to believe your child's heart is shifting. Why do we always got to do things your way? You act like this house is yours. You know I'm grown, right? Little darts tossed in between meals and moments, petty, but sharp enough to sting. Dee brushed it off. Mothers do that. They take the disrespect, turn it over in their minds, and convince themselves it was just a bad day. But it wasn't a bad day. It was the beginning. Because sometimes the most dangerous change isn't loud. It's quiet enough to look normal until it's too late. Travis began skipping chores he'd done his whole life, taking without asking, ignoring house rules, coming home with a tone that carried the arrogance of someone who believed the world owed him something. And Dee noticed something else: the absence of Mom. He stopped saying it casually, stopped saying it intentionally, stopped saying it altogether. Now it was just Dee, sharp, cold, like he was speaking to a stranger. She didn't confront him. She hoped he'd snap out of it. But entitlement doesn't disappear. It grows when left unchecked, especially in a home where one parent is gone. After Samuel's death, Travis saw himself as the man of the house. But instead of filling that role with protection and respect, he filled it with ego. He began telling people, yeah, this is my house, my inheritance. Inheritance he never paid for, a home he didn't build, love he didn't earn. And yet the arrogance kept growing. Dee tried to keep the peace, tried to remind him gently of who raised him, tried to show him love didn't make her weak. But every no she offered him, every boundary, every refusal to hand him money or access, widened the space between them, and Travis hated boundaries. He wanted control. He wanted authority. He wanted the freedom to take without remembering who gave. But entitlement never stops at wanting more. It eventually demands everything. The shift became undeniable one Sunday morning. Dee asked him to help fix the broken gutter. A simple request. Something Samuel would have done without being asked twice. Travis didn't even look up from his phone. That ain't my job, he muttered. Dee's breath caught, not because he refused, but because he said it with a tone that told her he'd forgotten who fed him, raised him, sacrificed for him. Travis, she said gently, I just need a little help. He rolled his eyes, the kind of roll that slices straight through a mother's heart. Woman, you always need something. Maybe if you'd kept up with things, you wouldn't be begging me now. Begging, that word was a slap. He stood up, puffed his chest, and said it again. You're just a burden at this point. Everything is on me. Everything. Everything. A lie so big it echoed through the whole house. Dee stared at him, the boy she raised, now speaking to her like she was an inconvenience. She didn't cry, she didn't yell, she just felt something inside her shift, a quiet click, like a lock turning in her spirit. Something was breaking, and it didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Travis brought a friend over and walked him through the house like a future realtor. This'll be my office once I renovate. Thinking of tearing this wall down. Might rent out the back room. The back room where Dee prayed every morning. The room where her tears dried after Samuel died. The room she kept like a sanctuary. He walked through it like it was already his. Dee watched from the kitchen doorway, unseen but hearing every word. Her hands trembled, not from anger but from the realization that the boy she saved no longer saw her as anything but an obstacle. And when a person sees you as an obstacle, removing you becomes easy. The breaking point came on a grey Thursday afternoon. Dee had baked cornbread, her peace offering whenever tension ran high. She placed a plate on the table and asked Travis if they could talk. He didn't sit down, didn't soften, didn't even pretend to care. What now? He snapped. Baby, I just want to understand. "You don't need to understand anything," he said, cutting her off. "You're holding me back. You're holding this house back. You should be in a retirement place anyway." Her chest tightened. She'd heard ugly things in her life, but never from him. "You're a burden, Dee," he said again. "Always have been. Always have been." That was the moment the mother in her cracked, not because the words were true, but because she finally saw the man he had chosen to become. Not the little boy she rescued, not the child she healed, but the adult who looked at kindness and saw weakness. And then he delivered the final blow. "I want you out by the end of the week." No yelling, no negotiation, just a cold eviction from the woman who gave him everything she had left. Dee didn't argue. She walked to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed with her hands folded in her lap, still calm, heartbreak tucked neatly behind dignity. Because love can shape a child, but it cannot force a man to choose decency. If this story is hitting you, if you're feeling this in your chest, take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. This is Untold Black Struggles, and we tell the stories nobody else will. Now, let's keep going. That night, Dee packed her bags. Not much, just clothes, important documents, and a few photos of Samuel. And early the next morning, she walked out of the home she raised Travis in, while he stayed in the living room, pretending not to see her leave. He didn't ask where she would go. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't say goodbye. Because in his mind, he'd won. He'd claimed ownership. He'd taken control. But he didn't realize he had just thrown away the only person who ever chose him without condition. What Travis didn't know was that the woman he cast out was walking away with a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about power. Dolores D. Hampton walked away from her own home with nothing but a suitcase and the strength God left in her bones. But what Travis never understood, and never even bothered to ask, was that Dee was not a woman who broke easily. She had already survived miscarriages, racism, widowhood, and the kind of loneliness that could hollow a person out. Losing a house? That wasn't going to finish her. She moved quietly, the way older black women do when they're carrying truths too heavy to share. Not with bitterness, not with fear. Just silence. A silence that held more power than Travis had the capacity to imagine. For years, people assumed Dee was surviving off Samuel's small pension or whatever she made selling handmade quilts at the church fairs. Nobody knew that behind the modest clothes, behind the calm smile, behind the humble way she lived, she was sitting on top of a fortune built with patience, discipline, and a level of foresight Travis never inherited. It started the year Samuel died. He had worked 34 years at a manufacturing plant, never missed a day, never complained, and he had a life insurance policy that Dee never touched for nearly a decade. She kept it parked in an account, untouched, building interest little by little. But that wasn't the part that changed everything. The real shift came when an old co-worker of Samuel's pulled Dee aside after the funeral and told her something Samuel had kept quiet. He had been saving part of every bonus, every tax refund, every overtime check, investing it through a union program. By the time he passed, those small seeds had grown into a substantial amount. Dee didn't cry when she heard it. She just nodded. She had learned long ago that blessings show up quietly, not loudly, and what she did next is what turned humble savings into the kind of money that changes destinies. Dee didn't run to a financial advisor. She didn't brag. She didn't rush into buying fancy things. Instead, she remembered Samuel's voice, deep, patient, always thinking 10 steps ahead. Land, Dee. Buy land. God ain't making no more of it. So she did. 5 acres outside town first, a strange purchase for a widow everyone assumed was barely making ends meet. Then 2 more pieces of land years later, plots no one cared about yet. But when new developments expanded and the town started pushing outward, those small plots became gold. Developers started calling. Her mailbox is filled with offers, numbers with too many zeros. That's when the fortune formed. Not overnight, not through luck. Through quiet, deliberate choices that grew while Travis strutted through life, convinced he had everything figured out. And the irony? While Travis was accusing her of being financially irresponsible, she was sitting on more security than he had ever had. One afternoon, weeks after being kicked out, Dee sat with her closest friend, Bernice Lee, a sharp 70-year-old woman with a church hat collection that could fill a museum. Bernice had known Dee since Samuel first brought her home, glowing with the kind of love you don't see much anymore. They sat on Bernice's porch as Dee explained everything: the land, the investments, the untouched accounts. Bernice just blinked and said, "Girl, if Jesus had given me this kind of patience, I'd be unstoppable." But then she asked the question no one else dared: "Why didn't you ever tell Travis?" Dee didn't hesitate. "Because you don't reward entitlement, you teach gratitude, and baby, he never learned it." She didn't say it with anger. She said it like a woman who finally recognized the truth she'd ignored for too long. But what Dee did next proved she wasn't just wealthy, she was wise. Instead of running back to confront Travis, instead of forcing a lesson down his throat, instead of proving anything, she doubled down on silence. She hired an attorney, not because she wanted a fight, but because she wanted clarity, structure, protection. She moved into a small condo, paid in cash, not flashy, not loud, not "look at me now," just peaceful. She furnished it with old photos and fresh plants, a quilt she made the night before Travis left for college, a framed picture of Samuel in his work uniform, smiling like he always had a joke ready. Peace is expensive for some people, but for Dee it was priceless. And while Travis paced around that house he stole, assuming he'd won, assuming he'd proven some twisted point, Dee spent her days reading, cooking, walking and breathing, healing. People in the community whispered. Some said Travis would come crawling back. Some said Dee was making a mistake by staying quiet. But Bernice, she understood. "You're not punishing him," she said one afternoon. "You're protecting yourself. There's a difference." Because sometimes the best revenge is not giving someone access to the life they took for granted. As months passed, Dee's wealth continued to grow. Her land was now part of a national development project. Her investments had hit a market surge. Her accounts were nearly triple what Samuel left behind. $9.5 million. But you'd never know it by looking at her. Because Dee knew money reveals character. And if Travis had known what she controlled, it wouldn't have made him grateful. It would have made him dangerous. He didn't need access. He didn't deserve information. He didn't earn trust. And Dee understood something most people learn far too late. You don't give undeserving hands the keys to generational wealth. And she was building exactly that. Before we go deeper, if you're still watching, that means you love stories that reveal the truth behind family, betrayal, and resilience. So hit that subscribe button right now. It helps the channel, and it makes sure you never miss stories like this. By now, Dee's silence wasn't a weakness. It was protection. It was a strategy. It was the difference between losing everything and rising from what tried to break her. She had been kicked out of a house, but she walked into a better life, richer, wiser, and beautifully unbothered. And Travis? He had no idea he was sitting in a house belonging to a woman who could have bought it 10 times over, in cash. But the real twist? The moment Travis finally learned the truth came from a letter that shattered everything he thought he knew about power, family, and the woman he threw away. Travis had always imagined that if his adoptive mother ever left, she'd come back eventually. Old people always did, he thought. They run out of money. They get lonely. They get desperate. And when they finally admit they can't survive on their own, they show up again, humble, apologetic, begging for a place to stay. That's what he believed would happen with Dolores D. Hampton. But the weeks after she left didn't sound like regret. Didn't feel like guilt. Didn't look like a woman chasing the life she lost. She didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't show up. She vanished with a kind of peace that unsettled him more than anger would have. Because nothing shakes a man like realizing the person he tried to break isn't breaking at all. At first, Travis enjoyed the freedom. He walked around the house like he owned the place, even though he'd never paid a bill in full, never tightened a pipe, never scrubbed the floors his mother once polished with quiet devotion. He bragged to friends about finally taking control. He hosted small gatherings, letting people believe he'd stepped into some new era of independence. But arrogance is loud, and emptiness is louder. Every room reminded him of her. The faint scent of lavender spray she used on the curtains, the dent in the hallway wall from when she carried Samuel's recliner in by herself, The framed family photo that he couldn't bring himself to remove, because deep down, he knew it was the only proof he had ever belonged to someone. The house felt less like a victory, and more like a throne he'd stolen from the wrong queen. And the truth about stolen thrones? They come with consequences. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of silence. Not Dee's silence. He expected that, but the silence of people he thought would support him. Bernice Lee, Dee's closest friend, wouldn't even look at him in the grocery store. Members of the church turned their backs when he walked in. Everyone seemed to know something he didn't. And nothing pricks a guilty man harder than realizing he's the only one who thinks he's right. One Saturday morning, Travis found a white envelope on the porch. Not hand-delivered, not addressed in Dee's handwriting. It came from a law office. At first he smiled, convinced she attempted to plead through a third party. Maybe she finally needed help. Maybe she wanted to return. He sat down, tore the envelope open, and stopped breathing halfway through the first sentence, because the truth in that letter was heavier than anything he had ever carried. The letter wasn't an apology. It wasn't a request. It was a notice, a legal statement informing him that Dolores Hampton, the woman he forced out of her own house, had transferred all her assets into a private trust, a trust worth $9.5 million. He read the number 3 times, thinking it was a typo. 9.5 million. The house he sat in wasn't even worth a fraction of that. A fraction of a fraction. The letter explained that all her land, investments and accounts were secured, protected and legally structured so that he would never have access, not today, not in the future, not as next of kin. And at the bottom, her signature. Small, elegant, unapologetic, Dolores M. Hampton. Under it, one line in the lawyer's handwriting, "Your mother requests no contact going forward." For the first time in his life, Travis understood what it felt like to lose someone who was still alive. Because some losses don't come from death, they come from truth. He called the law office. They refused to speak without her permission. He called Dee. Her number had been changed. He drove to her old job. She had retired. Every door he knocked on was closed, not by accident, but by design. And when he finally ran into Bernice Lee, she didn't offer sympathy. She didn't offer comfort. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "You threw away the only woman who loved you without condition, and now she's finally loving herself." Then she walked away. No lecture, no sermon, just truth. And if you're still watching, hit that subscribe button right now. These are the stories they never tell, and we bring them to light every week. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly the house began to feel like what it truly was. A monument to everything he didn't deserve. He started noticing things he had ignored for years. The hand-stitched throw blanket she made during his first high school winter, the dented mixing bowl she used for every birthday cake, the framed note Samuel wrote before he died, reminding Travis to take care of your mother. It was the note that broke him. Because he realized he had failed the only man who ever taught him what responsibility meant, and the only woman who showed him what love looked like. But the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing he'd lost the woman who would have given it to him freely if he had simply been decent. Travis tried one last thing. He mailed her a letter, a long apology, emotional, desperate. He blamed stress, he blamed grief, he blamed the confusion, he blamed everything except himself. The letter never came back, but it was never answered. Dee read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer, the same drawer that held Samuel's last letter to her. She didn't respond because she didn't need to. Some wounds don't need reopening. Some betrayals don't get do-overs. And for the first time in her life, Dee allowed herself to live without obligation, without guilt, without carrying a man who had grown too heavy. She joined a book club. She travelled. She took walks with Bernice every morning. And every step she took away from her old life brought her closer to the one thing she had never experienced fully, peace. Because freedom doesn't always come from money. Sometimes it comes from finally letting go. Travis, meanwhile, learned the truth most people never face. You can inherit a house, you can inherit a name, but you cannot inherit a character you never built. And Dee? She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to humiliate him. She simply let the truth do what truth always does, expose, correct, and separate. In the end, Travis wasn't cut off from her wealth. He was cut off from something far more valuable, the love of the woman he once called Mama. Because sometimes the richest woman in the story is the one a foolish man tried to throw away. And sometimes the only justice you need is to walk away and let silence do the talking.